Shit! I filmed almost 1 hour reading all pages of the chapter 2, but my laptop had gone off during the filming of this video, so I have to start all again. But anyway, I'm gonna do it all again. I was reading like page 47, but I'm gonna go back to page 29, chapter 2, Cain. Salvation from my tormentor came from a totally unexpected quarter, and at the same time I was conscious of a new element in my life, which has affected me right up to the present day. A new boy had just joined our school. He was the son of a well-to-do widow who had come to live in our town, and he wore a mourning band on his sleeve. He was placed in a higher class than mine and was several years older, but he soon impressed me as he impressed everybody else. This remarkable boy seemed older than he looked. He did not, in fact, seem like a boy at all. He moved along as more childish members of the school, strangely mature, like a man, or rather a gentleman. He was not popular. He took no part in games, still less in the general rough and tumble, and it was only the firm, self-confident tone he adopted in his attitude towards the masters that won in favor with the other boys. He was called Max Demian. One day, as happened now and again, an additional class was put in our large classroom for one reason or another. It was Demian's. We junior boys were having a scripture lesson. The senior boys had to write an essay. While we were being told the story of Cain and Abel, I kept glancing over towards Demian, whose face held a peculiar fascination for me, and I observed his bright, clever, unusually resolute face bent diligently over his work. He looked less like a schoolboy doing his prep than a research student absorbed in some individual problem of his own. He did not attract me. I was conscious, on the contrary, of a certain antipathy between us. He was too self-possessed and cool, too definitely confident. His eyes had a grown-up expression which never commends them to a young people. Faintly sad, with flashes of derision, but I could not help staring at him, whether I liked him or not. I hardly had he given me one glance, however, when I immediately averted my head in panic. When I think back to it today and how he looked as a schoolboy, I can certainly confirm that he was different from all the rest in every respect. An individual wholly in his own right, with his own personality stamped on him therefore, though he made every effort not to impress. He bore himself and behaved in every way like a prince, moving about among peasants incognito and taking great pains to look like them. He was walking behind me on the way home from school. When the others had run off, he caught me up and greeted me. Even his style of greeting, despite the fact he imitated our schoolboy tone of voice was grown up and courteous. "Shall we walk along together for a while?" he asked amiably. I was flattered and nodded. Then I described to him where I lived. "Oh, there?" He smiled. "I know the house. An odd thing had been built in above your front entrance. It has always intrigued me." I had no idea to what he was alluding, and I was amazed that he apparently knew our house better than I did myself. The keystone of the arch had certainly a coat of arms on it, but it had been worn smooth during the centuries and had often been painted over. As far as I knew, it had nothing to do with ourselves and our family history. "I don't know anything about it," I said shyly. "It's a bird or something of the sort. It must be quite ancient. The house is supposed to have belonged to a monastery in the old days." "That might well be so," he said, nodding. "Have a good look at it. I think the bird is a sparrow hawk." We walked on. I felt very constrained. Suddenly Demian laughed as if something comic had occurred to him. "Yes, I was there during your lesson," he burst out. "The story of Cain who bore the mark on his forehead, wasn't it? Do you like it?" No, it was rare for me to like anything we had to learn. I did not, however, dare to confess it, for I felt I was being addressed by a grown-up. I said I liked the story quite well. Demian slapped me on the back. "You don't need to put on act with me, dear chap. All the same, the story is really very remarkable, much more so than most of the other stories that are taught in class. Your teacher did not say much about it, just the usual comment about God and sin and so on. But I believe," he broke off and asked with a smile, "but are you interested?" "Yes, I believe, then," he continued, "that the story of Cain can be interpreted differently. Most of the stories we are taught are valid and authentic, but it is possible to see them from another angle than that of the teachers, and it gives them much more sense. You can feel satisfied with this Cain, for example, and with the mark on his forehead as they explain it to us. Don't you agree? Someone may certainly kill his own brother in a quarrel, and he may panic afterwards and eat humble pie, but that he should be remarked with a special sign for his cowardice that acts as a kind of protection and inspires fear in everybody else is strange indeed." "It is," I said, becoming interested in the subject, "but what other interpretation could one give the story?" He struck me on the shoulder again. "Quite simple. What happened and lay behind the whole origin of the story was the sign. Here was a man who had something in his face and frightened other people. They did not dare lay hands on him. He impressed them, he and his children. It is virtually certain that he bore no actual mark on his brow like a postmark. Real life isn't as crude as that. Rather, there was some hardly perceptible mark, a little more intelligence and self-possession in his eyes than people were accustomed to. This man had power, and they all went in awe of him. He had a sign. You can explain that how you will. People always want whatever is comfortable and puts them in the right. They were afraid of Cain's children. They bore a sign. So the sign was not interpreted for what it really was, but the contrary. They said that people with this sign were odd, as indeed they were. Men of courage and character always seem very sinister to the rest. It was a sinister thing that a breed of strange, fearless people should be going about, and so they attached a nickname and a myth to this family as a way of taking revenge and ridding themselves of guilt for all the fear they had experienced. Do you see? Yes, that means then that Cain was not really evil, and the whole Bible story isn't really authentic. Yes and no. These ancient stories are always true in a sense, but they are not always properly recorded or given a correct interpretation. In short, I consider Cain to be a fine fellow, and they pinned this story on to him merely because they were afraid of him. The story had its basis in heresy, the kind of thing people bandy about it, and it was true insofar as Cain and his children really bore some kind of remark and were different from other people. I was astounded. And do you believe that the business of the slaying isn't true either? I asked, fascinated. Oh yes, that's certainly true. The strong man slew the weak, but we may well doubt whether it was his brother. It isn't important. Ultimately, all men are brothers. Thus, a strong man slew a weak man. Perhaps it was the deed of a hero, perhaps not. At all events, the other weaklings were now filled with fear, complained bitterly, and when they were asked, "Why do you not slay him too?" they did not reply, "Because we're cowards, but we cannot. He has a sign. God hath branded him." The fraud must have originated somehow like that, but I'm keeping you. Goodbye, then. He turned into the outgas and left me standing there more baffled than I had ever been before in my life. Almost as soon as he had gone, everything he had said seemed utterly incredible. Cain, a noble man, Abel, a coward. The brand of Cain, a mark of distinction. It was absurd. It was blasphemous and wicked. Where had God been? Had he not accepted Abel's sacrifice? Did he not love Abel? No, it was all nonsense. Demian had wanted to fool me, lead me on, and get me into trouble. He was a devilish clever fellow and could talk, but he couldn't put that one over. I have never before given so much thought to a Bible story, or any other for that matter. It was a long time since I had forgotten Franz Cromer so completely, for hours, for a whole evening in fact. At home I read the story once again as it was written in the Bible. It was short and unambiguous, and it was quite mad to look for any special hidden meaning. At that rate, any murder could masquerade as a favored one of God. No, it was nonsense. It was just Damian's easy and attractive way of telling these things as if everything were self-evident. And then that look in his eyes. There was something very wrong with me. I had lived in a wholesome and unsullied world. I had been a kind of rebel, and now I was stuck so deeply in the other world. I had fallen and sunk, and yet, at heart, I could not really help it. How was this? And now a memory flashed through my mind, which left me almost breathless. On that fatal evening when my present trouble had begun, and I had been with my father, I had suddenly seen through his world of light and wisdom. Indeed, I myself, who was Cain and bore that sign, had imagined that the sign was nothing to be ashamed of, but a distinction rather, and that because of my wickedness and misfortune, I stood higher than my father, higher than the pious and righteous. I did not think the matter out as definitely as that, but my thought was composed of all these elements. It was a stirring of strange emotion that hurt me and filled me with pride at the same time. When I considered how strangely Demian had spoken of the fearless and the cowards, how oddly he had interpreted the sign on Cain's brow, how his remarkable adult eyes had lit up, the question flashed through my mind whether this Demian himself was not a kind of Cain. Why did he defend him if he didn't share the same feelings? Why had he this power in his eyes? Why did he speak so scornfully of the others, the timid souls who, after all, were the pious and chosen one of the Lord? These thoughts went round and round in my head. It was a stone dropped into a well, and the well was my youthful soul. And for a long time this matter of Cain, the murder, and the sign formed an outlet for my attempts at recognition, my doubts and criticism. I observed that Demian exercised a fascination over the other boys too. I had not breathed a word to anyone about Cain business, but the rest also seemed to be interested in him. At all events, there were many rumors in circulation about the new boy. If I only knew them all, I thought each one would throw some light on his character and have some significance. But I merely knew that Damian's mother was reported to be very wealthy. It was also said that neither she nor her son ever attended church. One boy wondered whether they might not be Jews, but they could equally well be Mohammedans. Tales were also current of Max Damian's physical prowess. He certainly had greatly humiliated the strongest boy in his class who had challenged him to a fight, and called him a coward when he refused to fight. Those who were present said Demian had just taken him by the scruff of the neck with one hand and squeezed hard, whereupon the boy had gone white and crept off. He was unable to use his arm for days afterwards. The whole of one evening it was rumored that he had died. For a time no assertion was too extravagant to be believed. Everything about him was amazing and exciting. Then they had enough, temporarily at any rate. Not much later there was further gossip among us. Some boys reported that Demian associated with girls and knew everything. Meanwhile, my business with Franz Krummer followed in its inevitable course. I could not escape him, for even when he left me in peace for a few days, I was still bound to him. He haunted my dreams like my own shadow, and any spell that he failed to cast over me in reality, my imagination allowed him to cast in those dreams in which I became utterly his slave. I lived in them. I was always a great dreamer, and I used up my health and strength more in these shadows than in real life. A recurrent nightmare was that Cromer was torturing me, spitting and kneeling on me, and what was worse, leading me on to serious crimes, or rather not so much leading me on as compelling me by sheer force of personality. The most horrible feature of these nightmares from which I would awake, half crazy, was a murderer's attack on my father. Cromer sharpened a knife and put it in my hand, and we stood behind the trees of an avenue, lying in wait for someone. But when that person approached, and Cromer conveyed to me by pinching my arm that this was the man I had to stab, I saw that it was my father. Then I would wake up. Although preoccupied with these things, I certainly did still think about Cain and Abel, but I gave little thought to Demian. When he first approached me, it was oddly enough, likewise in a dream. Once again I was dreaming of torture and violence of which I was the victim, but this time it was Demian who knelt on me. And this was a new feature and deeply impressed me. Everything that I had resisted and that had caused me pain when Cromer was my tormentor, I suffered gladly at Damian's hands with a feeling compounded as much of ecstasy as of fear. I dreamed it twice, but the third time I found Franz back in his accustomed role. I have long been unable to separate what I experienced in these dreams from the reality. Be that as it may, my bad relations with Cromer followed their course and were not at an end when I had paid off the sum owing to him with the fruits of my petty thefts. No, he now knew about these thefts, for he pestered me with questions about the source of the money, and I was more in his hands than ever. He frequently threatened to tell my father everything, but even then, my fear was hardly as great as my profound regret that I had not told father myself at the beginning. Meantime, miserable though I was, I did not regret it at all, at least not the whole time, and sometimes I believed that it was fated to happen in this way. My destiny hung over me, and it was useless for me to try to escape. Presumably, my parents were considerably distressed while this situation continued. A strange spirit had come over me. I no longer fitted into a community with which I had previously been so closely bound up, and I was often overcome with a wild hankering for it, as for some kind of lost paradise. My mother, it was true, treated me more like a wayward than a sick child, but I was better able to judge from my sister's attitude how matters really stood. This attitude of extreme indulgence towards me caused me infinite distress, because it made it plain to me that I was considered as one in some way possessed, more to be pitied than blamed for his condition, but one, nevertheless, in whom the devil had taken up his quarters. I felt that they were praying for me more than ever before, and I was conscious of the futility of their prayers. I often felt a burning need for relief, a longing for sincere confession, but I knew in advance that I would be unable to tell and explain it properly either to my mother or father. I knew that it would all be accepted sympathetically, that they would be sorry for me but would not understand, and that the whole thing would be regarded as an aberration, whereas in truth it was fate. I realized that many people will be unable to credit a child not yet 11 years old with such feelings. But this story is not intended for them. I am recounting it to those who have a better understanding of human nature. The grown-up who has learned to translate a part of his feelings into thoughts misses these thoughts in the child and therefore finally denies even the experiences themselves. But I have rarely felt and suffered more deeply than at the time. One rainy day I had been ordered by my tormentor to go to the town square. There I stood and waited, shuffling my feet among the wet chestnut leaves that were still falling from the wet trees. I had not any money, but had put 2 pieces of cake on one side to take along, so that at any rate I might be able to give Cromer something. I was used to standing in a corner and waiting for him, often for a very long time, and I put up with it the way one learns to tolerate the inevitable. At length, Cromer came up to me. He did not stay long. He dug me in the ribs a few times, laughed, took the cake, even offered me a damn cigarette, and was more friendly than usual. "Ah, yes," he said as he was leaving me. "Before I forget, you might bring your sister along next time. Your elder sister, I mean. What is her name, by the way?" I failed to grasp his point and made no reply. I looked at him surprised. "Don't you get me? You are to bring your sister." "Yes, Cromer, but it's no good. I won't be allowed to do so, and she wouldn't come in any case." His proposal did not surprise me. I saw it for what it was, a ruse and a pretext. It was the sort of thing he was always doing, demanding the impossible, threatening and humiliating me, and then gradually relenting. I had to buy myself off with money or some gift. This time, however, he was quite different. He was scarcely angry at all over my refusal. "Well," he remarked perfunctorily, "think it over. I would like to meet your sister. All you need to do is to bring her out for a walk, and then I will come up to you. I'll whistle for you tomorrow, and then we can discuss it again." When he had gone, something of the nature of his request suddenly dawned on me. I was still completely a child in these matters, but I knew from heresy that boys and girls, when they were a little older, could do a certain secret and improper things together. It flashed on me all at once how monstrous it was. My resolution never to be party to such a thing was made on the spot. But what would happen and how Cromer would take his revenge on me, I did not dare to think. It was the beginning of a new martyrdom for me. There were still worse things in store. Inconsolable, I walked across the empty square with my hands in my pockets. Further torments and slavery. I had reached that point in my thought when a deep, cheerful voice hailed me. I was startled and began to run. Someone was pursuing me. A hand fell gently on my shoulder from behind. It was Demian. I capitulated. Cap- capitulated. "Oh, it's you," I said softly. "You gave me such a fright." He looked at me. Never had his expression seemed more like that of a grown-up, a superior and perspicacious being than at that moment. We had not spoken to each other for a long time. "I'm sorry," he said in his polite yet firm way, "but look here, you oughtn't to let yourself be frightened like that." "But you can't always help it." "So it seems, but see here, when you shrink back from someone who hasn't done you any harm, then that someone begins to think. He is surprised. It makes him inquisitive. The someone thinks that you are remarkably nervous and comes to the conclusion that people are always like that when they are afraid. Cowards are always afraid, but I don't believe that you are a coward. Are you? Certainly you aren't a hero either. There are some things that you're afraid of. There are people too of whom you are afraid. And you oughtn't to be. No, one should never be afraid of any man. You're not afraid of me, or are you?" "Oh no, not at all." "There you are. But there are people you're frightened of." "I don't know." "Leave me alone. What do you want of me?" I quickened my pace with thoughts of flight, but he kept up with me, and I felt him glancing at me out of the corner of his eye. "Let us assume," he began again, "that I am well disposed towards you. At any rate, you've no need to be afraid of me. Right then, I'd like to carry out an experiment with you. It is quite a light-hearted one, and you may learn something that will prove very useful. Listen then. I often try out an art which is known as thought reading. There's no black magic about it, but if you don't know how it is done, it seems uncanny. You can cause people considerable surprise too. Well, we will try the experiment. Now, I am fond of you or interested in you, and I would like to discover what it's like inside you. To do this, I have already taken the initial step. I frightened you. You're therefore in a nervous state. How has that come about? You don't need to be afraid of anybody. When you're afraid of someone, it means you have provided that someone with some kind of lever. You have done something wrong, for example, and the other person knows this, and by this means has acquired a hold over you. You understand? It's clear enough, isn't it? I looked up helplessly at a face which was as serious and intelligent as ever, and good-natured too, but there was no tenderness in his manner, which was severe. It had an element of righteousness or something akin to it. I was hardly aware of what was happening to me. He stood over me like a magician. "Have you got my meaning?" he asked again. I nodded. I was unable to speak. "I told you thought reading seems comic, but it comes about quite naturally. I could, for example, tell you pretty accurately what you thought about me when I once told you the story of Cain and Abel. But that has nothing to do with the present case. I also consider it possible that you once dreamed about me, but let's forget that too. You're a bright lad, and most of them are so stupid. I enjoy an occasional chat with an intelligent person in whom I can have confidence. Do you mind? Of course not, but I don't understand. Let's keep to our light-hearted experiment. So, we have discovered this much. The boy X is frightened. He is afraid of someone. He probably shares a secret with this one other fellow, which is very uncomfortable for him. Isn't that, roughly speaking, the situation? I succumbed to his voice and influence as in a dream. All I could do was to nod. It was like a voice which could only emanate from myself. A voice, indeed, that I knew everything better and more clearly than myself. Demian slapped me on the back. So that's what it is? I thought it might be. Now, just one question. Can you tell me the name of the boy who went off a few moments ago? I was terrified. My threatened secret crawled back inside me, afraid to come out into the daylight. What kind of boy? There wasn't any boy there. Only me. He laughed. Tell me, he laughed. What's his name? Do you mean Franz Cromer? I whispered. He gave a satisfied nod. Good. You're a sensible chap. We'll become friends yet. But first, I must tell you something. This Cromer, or whatever his name is a rotter. I can tell by his face that he's a scoundrel. What do you think? Oh yes, I sighed. He's a bad lad. Oh, right, he's the devil himself. But he mustn't hear about this. For God's sake, he mustn't hear. Do you know him? Does he know you? Does he know you? Don't worry, he's gone off and he doesn't know me. Not yet, but I'd like to make his acquaintance. Does he go to the village school? Yes. What class? The top class, but don't say anything to him, please. Please don't say anything. Don't worry, nothing will happen to you. I don't suppose you would care to me a bit more about this Cromer fellow? I can't. No, leave me. He was silent for a while. It's a pity, he said. We could have carried the experiment one stage further, but I won't torment you. But do you realize, don't you, that your fear of him is all wrong? A fear of that kind can be our ruin. We've got to get rid of it. You've got to get rid of it, and you must get rid of it if you're going to be any good. Do you understand? Certainly, you're quite right, but it's no good. You don't know. But you've seen that I know a good deal more than you thought. Do you owe him some money? Yes, that as well, but that's not the main thing. I can't tell you. I can't. Wouldn't it help then if I gave you the sum of money which you owe him? I could easily do so. No, it's not that, and I implore you not to say anything about it to anyone. Not a word. You're making me very unhappy. You can rely on me, Sinclair. You can tell me your secret some other time. Never, never, I cried loudly. Just as you like. All I mean is that perhaps you may tell me more about it later. Voluntarily, of course. You don't think I would behave like Cromer, I hope? Oh no, but you know practically nothing about it. Nothing at all. I am merely thinking about it, and believe me, I would never follow Cromer's example, and you don't owe me anything. We did not speak for a long time, and I calmed down. But I found Damian's knowledge all the more puzzling. I'm going home now, he said, gathering his coat closer around him in the rain. There's just one more thing that I would like to say, since we have got so far. You ought to get rid of the fellow. If there's nothing else for it, kill him. I should be pleased and impressed if you did. I would even lend you a hand. My fear returned again. The story of Cain suddenly recurred to me. The whole thing seemed sinister to me, and I began to weep silently. Too many strange things were going on around me. Good then, laughed Max Damian. Go home now. We'll do something. Though murder would be the simplest. The simplest thing is always the best in such cases. You're in bad hands with friend Cromer. I found my way home and felt as if I had been away for a year. Everything looked different. Between me and Cromer stood something like the future. Something in the nature of hope. I was no longer alone, and now for the first time I saw how terribly alone I had been with my secret all those weeks. And something occurred to me over which I had often pondered, that a confession to my parents would merely relieve me without entirely redeeming me. Now I had almost confessed to someone else, a stranger, and a feeling of relief rushed at me like a strong perfume. For all that, my fear was still far from conquered, and I was prepared for a long series of terrifying disputes with my enemy. That was why it seemed remarkable that matters were being allowed to drift so discreetly and undisturbed. For a whole day, 2-3 days a week, there was no sound of Cromer's whistle in front of our house. I could not believe it, and was continually on the watch in case he might suddenly reappear when he was least expected. But he continued to absent himself. Mistrustful of my new freedom, I could not really believe in it until at length I met Franz Cromer. He was coming towards me down the Sailgasse. When he saw me, his features were distorted in an ugly grimace, and without more ado, he turned round in order to avoid meeting me. It was an astonishing moment for me. My enemy was running away from me. The devil was afraid of me. I felt a thrill of joy and surprise. Demian showed himself again during those days. He waited for me in front of the school. Hello, I said. Good morning, Sinclair. I only wanted to hear how you were getting on. Cromer is leaving you alone, isn't he? Are you responsible for that? But how then? How? I can't understand it. He's kept right away. That's good. If he should turn up again, I don't think he will, but he's an insolent fellow. Just tell him not to forget Demian. But what's the connection? Did you pick a quarrel with him and thrash him? No, I'm not keen on that sort of thing. I've merely been talking to him as I did to you, and made it plain that it is to his own advantage to leave you alone. Oh, but you haven't paid him any money? No, Sonny, you had tried that method already. He made off. though I badly wanted to question him, and I was left with the oppressive feeling he always gave me. It was an odd mixture of gratitude and awe, admiration and fear, consent and inward hostility. I resolved to see him again soon so that I could discuss it all with him as well as the Cain business. But this was not to be. Gratitude is certainly not a virtue that I believe in and to expect it from a child would seem false. So the utter ingratitude I showed towards Max Demian does not surprise me. Today I have no doubt whatsoever that I should never have recovered but would have been ruined for life if he had not freed me from Cromer's clutches. Even at the time I was conscious of this liberation of the greatest experience of my young life, but I deserted my liberator as soon as he had accomplished the miracle. There was nothing remarkable, but as I have just affirmed, about my ingratitude. The one strange thing was my lack of curiosity. How was it possible for me to live another day without drawing any closer to the secrets with which Demian had brought me into contact? How could I resist the curiosity to hear more about Cain, more about Cromer, more about thought reading? It is hardly comprehensible, and yet it was so. I suddenly saw myself extricated from the snares of the devil, and saw the world lying bright and joyful before me. I was no longer succumbing to attacks of fear and suffocating palpitations. The spell was broken. I was no longer damned and tormented. I was a schoolboy again. My nature was striving to regain its equilibrium and composure, seeking above all else to put away from me and forget whatever was ugly and threatening. The whole long story of my guilt and fright was slipping away from my memory with incredible rapidity without leaving behind any scars or ill effects. I can also understand today why I was trying to forget my Savior and Helper with equal rapidity. From the valley of sorrows of my damnation, from the frightful slavery from Cromer, I was fleeing back with every fiber of my damaged soul to where I had been happy and contented. The lost paradise that was now opening up again, the untroubled world of mother and father to my sisters, and the smell of cleanliness at oneness with the God of Abel. Already on the day following my short conversation with Demian, when I was finally fully convinced of my newly won freedom and had no fear of losing it again, I did what I had so often and so desperately wanted. I confessed. I went to my mother. I showed her the money box and it with its damaged, locked, and filled with counters instead of money, and I told her how long I had bound myself to my own guilt to an evil tormentor. She did not wholly grasp my story, but she saw the money box, the change in my appearance, heard the change in my tone of voice, and felt that I was cured and restored to her. And now, with heightened emotions, I underwent the ceremony of my readmittance to the fold, the prodigal son's homecoming. Mother took me along to father. The story was repeated. Questions and exclamations of praise were showered on me. Both parents patted me on the head and breathed great signs of relief. Everything was marvelous. Everything was like the fairy tales. Everything was restored to a wonderful harmony. I escaped into this harmony with real emotion. I could never be thankful enough at having regained my peace of mind and parents' confidence. I became a model homeboy, played more than ever with my sisters, and at evening prayers I sang all the favorite hymns with the feelings of the homecomer who is saved. It came from the heart. There was nothing false about it. And yet my house was not really in order. It was that fact alone that really accounted for my neglectful attitude towards Demian, for it was to him that I should have confessed. The confession would have been less exaggerated, less emotional, but much more fruitful for me. As it was, I was clinging with all my roots to my former earthly paradise. I had returned home and had been accepted in grace. But it was not Damian's world, nor was he suited to it. He, too, thought in a different way from Comer, was a tempter, and moreover my link with the second, evil world with which I never wanted to have anything more to do. I could not and would not abandon Abel and glorify Cain now that I myself had once more became an Abel. That was the outward connection. The inner, however, was that I had escaped from commerce and the devil's hand, but not through any power and effort of my own. I had tried to tread the path of the world, and they had been too slippery for me. Now, as the grip of a friendly hand had saved me, I retreated to my mother's lap and the security of a pious and hatched in childhood without as much as a glance at the world outside. I made myself into someone younger, more dependent and childish than I was. I had to replace my dependency on Comer by a new one, for I was unable to walk alone. In the blindness of my heart, I chose to be dependent on my father and mother, on all the familiar and much cherished world of light. I already knew that it was not the only one. If I had not followed this course, I would have had to stick to Demian and confide in him. That I did not do so seemed to me at that time on account of my justifiable mistrust of his strange ideas. In reality, it was entirely because of fear. For Demian would have been far more exacting than my parents. By means of persuasion, admonition, mockery, and sarcasm, he had done his best to foster an independent spirit in me. Alas, how well I realize that today. Nothing in the world is more distasteful to a man to follow the path that leads to himself. Yet 6 months later, I was unable to resist the temptation, and during a walk I asked my father what one was to make of the fact that many people considered Cain better than Abel. He was taken aback and explained that this was an interpretation which was by no means new to our time. It was one that had arisen already in Old Testament times, and it had been taught among sects which included the Cainites. But this heresy was, of course, merely an attempt on the part of the devil to destroy our beliefs. For if one believed in the right of Cain and the wrong of Abel, then it followed that God had committed an error, that the God of the Bible was not the true and only God, but a false God. In reality, the Cainites were reputed to have taught and preached something of the sort, but this false doctrine had long disappeared, and he was surprised that a snow friend of mine should have heard anything about it. A school friend of mine should have heard anything about it. At all events, he warned me gravely against harboring such ideas.